Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Sebbing. Today we're starting a new series. We're going to be chatting with some of the designers that we feature in our Stashin with Stephanie Club. If you haven't heard about Stashin with Stephanie, you should check out the description box below. Basically, you get 10 fat quarters for $29.99 a month plus shipping each month. Plus you get 12 free patterns a year if you stay on for the whole year, 1 free a month, and you get exclusive discounts every month and first dibs at these wonderful fabrics from our designers. So first up, we have Yelena Bryksenkova. She is an illustrator and works mostly in the commercial space, but she also does artwork for exhibition as well and has worked on some children's books. And this month we are featuring her second fabric collection, Celestial, from FIGO. Many of you guys may know Northcott, which is a parent company of FIGO. They are known in the traditional quilt world very well. They have offices in the US and Canada. And then they came out probably about 4 or 5 years ago now with FIGO, and that was a way to sort of modernize and have all of the lovely modern prints all together under one new brand. All right, well, let's chat with Yelena. Well, welcome, Yelena. Thanks for taking some time to chat with me today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, thank you for being our guinea pig as we start off this series where we talk with some of the fabric designers that we feature in our Stashin with Stephanie Club. I've got your collection behind me and the quilt that we've made with it, so we can show that off. Very talented. So you are an illustrator and you work in exhibitions as well. So tell me a little bit about how you got started. Obviously, you went to school for art and you studied both here in the States and in Europe. So have you always drawn since you were little, or did that develop over time?
I don't think I drew particularly more than any other child as a kid. It was just in high school, I took a commercial art program that was kind of an art school preparation program. And I just felt like that's absolutely what I need to do. So I went to study illustration at the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore. And I had started doing a few freelance projects here and there as I was working toward my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. And then about 2 years after receiving my degree, I was able to go full-time into full-time illustration, and I've been doing that for about 9 years now.
How does a career like that evolve? I imagine it's challenging because you're a creative person, but you also have to have this business sense to go along with that in order to make sure you have enough steady work in to pay the bills and go after clients. So how did that work for you?
I think, well, I mean, I appreciate that part of my schooling was there was an element of, because it's commercial art, there wasn't a business element to it. So because I didn't do a strictly fine arts discipline, I specifically studied illustration. So it wasn't just how to draw and paint. It was geared specifically toward problem solving and answering a specific prompt or illustrating a specific story for a client. So my education was already geared toward that kind of discipline. But also, I think I was really excited to get out there and start working. And I think this was around, 2011, 2012. I was an early adopter on places like Instagram. So I think that was already a tool that many artists were using at the time. And I started using it for self-promotion, and also blogging was a huge thing back then. I remember I would just send my work to blogs like Design Sponge, which is now defunct, unfortunately, but at the time it was huge, and I just sent my work and had it featured, and that was able to, I was able to put my work in front of a lot of people at once. And that naturally led to work. And then once you build a portfolio, that leads to more work.
So do you try to do a healthy mix of things that are commercial that pay the bills and then things that are personal to feed your soul?
Yes, definitely. I think it's really important because for me, the personal work that I do is really where my style develops, where I make new breakthroughs and figure out a new way of working on something. It's where I experiment and just figure out which direction I want my work to go in, which is then the things I have learned and the things that I've developed is what I then apply to my commercial work. So for me, it's definitely really important to have a healthy balance because as an illustrator, I'm not always going to be hired to paint my favorite things, and I have to figure out how to do that in a way that is interesting for me. and engaging. But in my personal work, I can just relax and paint whatever it is that I want without worrying about anybody else.
Do some of those become licensed prints later?
Yeah, actually, that has happened before. Things that I've done for myself, someone has reached out to put it on a greeting card. That's the nice thing about like ownership of my personal work, is that often a piece will have more than one life. So as an original painting that I either keep for myself or that somebody buys through a gallery, but then that can also be sold as a print, that can be licensed to become a greeting card. So yeah, it's very versatile.
What, for somebody who knows nothing about commercial illustration and how it works, like how do we go from I like to create art to I get paid and make a living creating art?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure. I guess I just something 10 years ago about what I was sharing online resonated with someone. Maybe it was stylistically part of some sort of zeitgeist. I think also with my work in particular, because I'm somebody that works almost entirely by hand. I think that that's something really intrigues people. And I don't know, there must be something stylistically that attracts a certain kind of client. And I really try to evolve with the times while still keeping true to myself. So I don't know, it was a pretty organic process. I think just not being afraid to share my work online was a big part of that, and being really conscientious of how I built a quote unquote brand around my work. I generally don't really call it that, but I think for me it was really important to not only just put my work out there in a clean, well-presented way and through a portfolio, but also build a world around it. I kept a blog for a really long time where I shared my process and my inspiration. I think people really like to see that. So I feel like that was probably one of the keys to the reason that I was able to succeed in such a competitive field and continue to do, thankfully.
How does the process work of going from starting with working with your hands to eventually digitizing for whatever medium it is that the marketing is calling for?
So normally when somebody reaches out to me with a job, I do a sketch and then they approve it, and then I move on to the final painting. And then once that's finished, I just scan it in, and I try to do most things by hand with minimal digital processes, usually just kind of like cleaning it up, because the thing with when you work with a painting, there's often like little bits of paintbrush or eyelashes and things like that get stuck in there. So normally I just spend a little bit of time just kind of photoshopping those small imperfections, but usually that's it. But recently I've expanded my work process a little bit by using the program Procreate for the iPad Pro, which is kind of like a Photoshop-like program, but it has a really beautiful way of mimicking different tools that one would normally use by hand. So lately I have gotten into the habit of first scanning my paintings and then importing them into Procreate, and then doing a little bit of finishing with like a bit of graphite pencil within the program or something like that. Things that I wouldn't maybe necessarily be able to do as well by hand, because I work on a very small scale. Also, my illustrations are usually like 5 by 5 inches, very, very miniature. And so that has become in the last year kind of a slightly more digital component to the work that I do. And then I send that off to the client, and that's all.
Do you have like a favorite type of work that you like to do? Like I see you've worked for some big brands like Etsy, FabFitFun, you've illustrated children's books. Is there one that you like more than another, or just, a project that intrigues you?
The most common thing that I do is usually illustrations for books and magazines, and then occasionally like greeting cards and surface design, like my work for FabFitFun. I think that probably, it's hard to say. I think book illustration is my favorite. As long as I haven't had many opportunities to illustrate a whole story. That's often like a whole a whole different beast where it's like the same character experiencing the whole story. I usually get hired to do kind of books where it's like a collection of different illustrations, like a book about different words, or like right now I'm working on a book about different dog behaviors. So like each illustration is like a piece of art in and of itself that doesn't need to be reinterpreted throughout the book. But it's important for me to have a kind of versatility in my style so that I can do different types of work, and I enjoy doing different types of work. It's really important for me not to be pigeonholed into a specific kind of or style of illustration.
So for Celestial, this is your second collection, right, for FIGO? Mm-hmm. So how did you transition then into fabric? Was that a licensing conversation? How did that come to be?
That was designed completely from scratch. FIGO had approached me about designing a collection for fabric. I had never done that before. I don't really think, designing fabric requires a certain kind of thinking and repeat patterns, like really understanding how they work, how scale works, how color works in a pattern. And so for me, it was quite a learning curve, especially with my first collection that I did. It was a travel themed collection called Away We Go. And then they came back for a second one. And I feel that already with the second one, I had learned so much from the experience of the first one that I do feel that this new collection has a little bit more, like I felt a bit more gracefulness in my process of working with it.
Well, I can tell you that we have heard from several of our subscribers who already have their fabric in hand that they are loving it, and husbands have already claimed whatever they're making with it for them, which is hard to do. It's hard to create a collection that guys and the ladies will like as well. So when you started to do it, and it intrigued me, you said you work with normally like 5x5 illustrations. Obviously a repeat for fabric is much larger than that. So how did you have to get your mind around creating the different star signs and the celestial beings to fit in that?
Well, that was one of the things that I really appreciate about working with FIGO, is that they were very they knew that I don't come from a fabric design background. So my liaison that I had worked with was like very patient and very kind, and really explained to me how one designs a print. And so by the time I did my second collection, I was a little bit more dexterous with that whole process. And I think that that's where using the program Procreate really came in handy, because I think I would have, with my first collection, I struggled more because I would do everything by hand and then scan it in and then play around with scale. But by the time the second collection came around, I was already able to sketch these things out digitally on my iPad, which instantly gave me so much more control of the image, while I'm still drawing it. So I could like play around with scale instantly as I was drawing it, and then filling in little elements where I felt like there needed to be something else, or take out something that I felt was extra. So the process the second time around was a lot more smooth.
Was it challenging at all working with having a limit on how many colors you could have in a piece?
Not really. I love a limited color palette. I find that it's one of those restrictions that is actually makes for really interesting work. I tend to limit my color palette every time I do any kind of commercial work. I think that choosing the palette and then finding creative ways to balance all of those different colors is a challenge that makes for much more interesting work than if like I had the freedom to just use all the colors.
I think what people at home don't know is if you ever look at the selvage print on a piece of fabric, it shows you what colors are in that piece. So it's good if you're mixing and matching, but there's a limit on that. You can only have so many screens to create it. So that creates all new challenges for you. Now, do you sew at all? Have you sewn at all when you were growing up?
This is what's interesting. This collaboration with FIGO is a major catalyst for my newfound passions. When they first invited me to do the first collection, I thought, well, they're going to send me samples, and if I don't sew, I'm not going to be able to use them in any way. So I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and as I was designing the collection, I went and I took a class nearby on how to use a sewing machine. And before I knew it, I had my own sewing machine. This was about 2 years ago. And since then, I've just completely like fallen in love with the world of quilting and sewing. And I'm all the time, there's such a wealth of well-produced, informative content on YouTube for free. And I've just been taking advantage of that and learning as much as I could and trying to utilize my new fabrics.
So are you sewing garments? Are you sewing quilts?
I'm not ready for clothes quite yet, but definitely quilting. I became really fascinated with quilts at the time, and I had a whole Pinterest board of all this quilt inspiration and different blocks and the history of quilts, especially, I mean, American quilts are so beautiful. And I was really afraid to start making my first quilt. So I kind of complicated the process by first getting really into natural dyeing. So my first kind of, my first foray into this world of textiles was that I became really interested in dyeing with plants and plant extracts. And then finally, like after a whole summer of experimenting with that, I finally started connecting those pieces of fabric into quilts, and I'm working on my first queen size quilt.
Ooh, that's always exciting. I quilted my first queen size quilt with a regular presser foot because I had no idea what the funny looking walking foot was.
Yeah.
And my husband still uses that quilt daily, like 12, 13 years later.
That's really sweet. I think I decided that I'm gonna hand quilt this first quilt because I just like maneuvering a quilt through a sewing machine is just,
it's challenging when it's that big.
Really challenging in a way that honestly, like I thought, I was like, okay, I'm gonna try hand quilting. I know that's gonna be more challenging, but I've tried it on smaller projects and I love it. I think that's gonna be the way to go for me.
So now that you've learned a little bit and you've done some quilting, did that change how you approached fabric design at all? Now that you understood how things look different when they're cut up into different sizes and then go back together?
I think so. Yeah, I've been making mostly with printed fabrics. I've been making mostly smaller projects, but it's definitely informing how I interpret this whole process. I'd be curious to see, like, if I had the opportunity to do yet another collection, I'd be curious to see how, now that I'm actually a user of these fabrics, how I'm gonna apply that knowledge to designing in the future.
I've heard it described before from fabric designers that it's interesting because what they're essentially creating is an unfinished good. You know, typically when you put a piece of art out there, it is what it is and it's to be consumed. But for this, you know, people are going to take it and they're going to cut it up and they're going to do things that you would never imagine they might do with it. And so it's very interesting to see what happens after you're done.
Mm-hmm. And I love seeing that. I get tagged often on Instagram by people that have completed projects using my collection. And it's just like, it makes me so happy. All kinds of tote bags, clothes, things I never would have imagined.
So you've lived in a lot of places in your life. And so has that, moving around, you're born in Russia, you grew up in this kind of middle America, you've been in LA, now you're in Canada. Has that involved or informed your creative process at all?
I think so, definitely. For me, I think the most obvious way in which all of these different places have informed me is in the color palettes that I use. I found that living in Los Angeles for a couple of years informed my my inclination towards certain colors tremendously. I was really into kind of sun-bleached terracottas and sage greens, and a lot of my paintings use the palette like that, as well as like the kind of fabrics that I was drawn to. Like when I was in Los Angeles when I first started quilting, and the kind of fabrics I started collecting were very much in those colors. And then now that I'm in Quebec, especially since I've started dyeing with plants that occur naturally in the environment around me, that also has informed me in the colors that I work with across all the different media with which I work.
What are some of the best plants to dye your own fabric with?
Goldenrod is a major, it has, because plants are, some contain better dye properties than others. Some are more color fast than others. And I found the goldenrod it's the most versatile because it produces, based on how long you you soak your fabric in the dye, it produces such a large spectrum of yellows. And then if you modify that with other chemicals, you get all sorts of greens and grays. It's amazing. It's my favorite one so far.
All right. So is there anything else about you that we absolutely have to know?
That's a good question. I don't know. I guess one thing that about this collection that I wanted to say, that the inspiration behind this collection was kind of funny, that I love like celestial symbolism anyway. I love stars and moons and things that twinkle in the night sky, but also one of the prints in the collection, the one that features kind of mythological characters inspired by the 12 signs of the zodiac. Mm-hmm. The starting off point for that print was an early 19th century collection of star maps that I found called the Celestial Atlas by this guy named Alexander Jameson. And I just love the kind of imaginative, over the top, often scientifically erroneous interpretation of the heavens in these old prints. And so I thought it might be interesting to know that that was kind of a starting off point for me for this collection. Oh, and also I was thrilled to learn that FIGO was able to print some of the design elements with metallic gold. I think that just makes it so much more special.
It does. It sparkles and shines, especially on such a grayscale color palette. It works really well. So that was kind of your starting off point. That was kind of your hero print. How did it evolve from there?
Well, I think when we first discussed this theme of celestial, there's two aspects to it. So there's the kind of the more straightforward astronomical aspect, the stars and the comets and the phases of the moon. And then there's the astrological aspect, of course, how we, the ancient traditions of looking to the skies for guidance and deeper meaning. And there's so much interesting symbolism and like just graphic art within that whole world that the collection kind of encompasses all of that.
So did they come to you and say, hey, we're thinking of something that is celestial, the heavens, or how did that work?
They did. Yeah, that was a theme that they approached me with already. And I think that's one of those that kind of people are always interested in. So I'm really glad that they chose me for that theme. And so it was not a hard one to get excited about.
Do they have kind of a list that they put out there and say, hey, what is everybody feeling? Or do they come to you with a specific, I think you would be good with this one?
I think that they do look for input. Like they did ask, what sort of like, what kind of ideas do I have? And I think with my first collection, the travel theme was kind of a collaboration between us and them. But in this case, I think that they really wanted to do this kind of celestial theme collection, and they chose me.
Do you have any ideas for a third maybe? Or are you or that's not in the works just yet?
Not yet, but I wonder. I think, once you start working with patterns, you begin to think a little bit more with that in the back of your mind. But I love just any kind of natural elements. I think that would be great. Whatever, trees, flowers, those are always good themes and can always be reinterpreted in a million ways.
Well, I know that our customers really love buying anything natural and floral. I can tell you that. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with me today.
My pleasure.
And I think that everyone will enjoy getting to know you and your inspiration behind the fabric a little bit better.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you so much for watching our very first designer interview. We're going to be doing this every month as long as the designer schedules allow, to give you an introduction and let you know a little bit more about the faces who create the lovely fabrics that we love to work with, and give you a peek into their lives, peek into their design and creative process, and also kind of show how things go from idea to fabric, because a lot of times we think as quilters that, the people who are designing fabrics must also be avid quilters, and that's not always the case. A lot of times it's an artist like Yelena who licensed her work or is approached by a fabric company to create something for them. So check it out. We have Celestial wall supplies last at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. We've got a video tutorial on the quilt behind me, a star sign that we designed to go with the fabric. That pattern is going to be available, and we do have kits again, wall supplies last. This fabric is a one and done line. which means they print it, and when it's sold out, that's it. And so we're no longer able to get the entire collection. So, you know, what we have, we've got, and when it's gone, that's it. So a really great reason to be a member of our Stashin with Stephanie Club, because you're gonna get that fat quarter bundle, you're gonna get first dibs on getting additional fabric, so you can create that quilt that we have designed that has been inspired by the fabric, and you can sign up for that over at shop.quiltanxanonymous.com. Thanks so much, and happy quilting.